Faster now! Push!
What if the giants of the ancient world never truly disappeared? Across every continent, civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years told the same terrifying story. Giant beings, half-human creatures, ancient races that existed before mankind rose to power. And somehow the details are almost identical. The Bible calls them the Nephilim. Norwegian legends speak of trolls hidden in the mountains. Greek mythology remembers the Cyclops. Hindu texts describe the powerful Asura. Ireland feared the mysterious Fomorians. Different cultures, yet all describing giant supernatural beings connected to chaos, destruction, and forbidden origins. How could civilizations with no contact preserve the same story for thousands of years? Tonight, we will uncover 7 terrifying creatures from mythology and ancient history that may share one shocking connection. The Nephilim of Genesis. Genesis 6 warns that giants existed before the flood and also afterward. When the sons of God joined with the daughters of men, extraordinary beings were born upon the earth. These were not ordinary humans, but creatures outside the natural order. But according to the Bible, the story of the giants did not end with the flood. Numbers 13:33 describes the spies of Israel seeing the sons of Anak in Canaan, direct descendants of the Nephilim. Deuteronomy also speaks of King Og of Bashan, one of the last giants whose bed measured over 13 feet long. Some interpretations suggest the bloodline may not have been fully erased. So what really survived the flood? What if creatures like Bigfoot, trolls, Cyclops, and other legendary beings are not myths at all, but echoes of an ancient race the world was never meant to remember? The deeper we go into these 7 creatures, the harder it becomes to deny the connection. The first creature tied to this ancient mystery is Bigfoot. For generations, people across North America have reported seeing a massive human-like figure moving silently through deep forests. Covered in dark hair and far larger than any normal man, the creature appears briefly, leaves enormous footprints behind, and then vanishes back into the wilderness. Yet the mystery surrounding Bigfoot existed long before the modern world ever documented it. Native American tribes spoke of a giant forest being centuries before the modern world gave it a name. The Salish people called it Sasquatch, describing it not as an animal, but as something ancient and deeply connected to the spiritual world. A being that existed between mankind and something far older. That description sounds strangely familiar. Genesis 6 says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that." Those words suggest the giants did not completely disappear after the flood. Numbers 13:33 later describes the sons of Anak, descendants of the giants who still existed in the land of Canaan. Could Bigfoot be connected to that forgotten bloodline? Sightings have been reported across nearly every region of North America, from remote mountain forests to isolated swamps. Witnesses often describe impossible strength, unnatural speed, and movements unlike anything human. In 1967, the famous Patterson-Gimlin footage captured a towering figure walking through Bluff Creek, creating one of the most debated pieces of evidence in cryptid history. Some researchers argued the movement and body structure shown in the film did not match normal human anatomy. Others believed it revealed something entirely unknown. Some researchers speculate that if the Nephilim survived after the flood, legends like Bigfoot may have been inspired by those ancient stories. It may be a surviving echo of the ancient giants mentioned in Scripture. A remnant of a world history was never meant to remember. The next creature leads us into the frozen mountains and dark forests of northern Europe, where the ancient legend of the troll has survived for centuries. In Norwegian mythology, trolls were described as enormous beings that lived far from human civilization, hiding beneath cliffs, deep inside caves, and beneath isolated bridges lost in the wilderness. Their appearance was terrifying. Massive bodies, harsh features, skin compared to stone or the bark of ancient trees. But beneath the monstrous image lies something far more disturbing. Many of the oldest Nordic traditions describe trolls not as simple beasts, but as beings older than mankind itself. And that disturbing detail leads directly to another question. Why do so many ancient cultures connect giant creatures to a forgotten age before recorded history? The stories surrounding trolls share striking similarities with the Nephilim of Genesis. Immense strength, separation from humanity, ancient knowledge tied to the old world. Some legends even describe trolls guarding hidden treasures and forbidden places, as though protecting secrets buried since ancient times. Genesis 6 speaks of giants who existed before the flood, beings born from the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. And according to several biblical passages, traces of those giant bloodlines continued after the flood as well. Could the trolls of Northern Europe be another distorted memory of those ancient beings? The oldest Scandinavian accounts suggest these creatures belonged to a world that existed before the rise of kings, nations, and even the gods of Norse mythology themselves. If true, the troll may represent more than folklore. It may reflect Europe's version of the ancient giant traditions remembered across many cultures. The third creature takes us into the world of ancient Greece, where one of mythology's most terrifying giants still echoes through history, the Cyclops. Known for its enormous size and single eye set in the center of its forehead, the Cyclops was feared as a being of overwhelming power, something far beyond ordinary men. In Greek tradition, the Cyclopes were not described as simple monsters. They were ancient beings connected to the earliest age of the world. Hesiod wrote that they were the children of Uranus and Gaia, creatures that existed before even the Olympian gods rose to power. That detail is strikingly similar to the biblical idea of a giant race born in the distant world before the flood. The Cyclopes were also known as builders of impossible weapons and masters of supernatural craftsmanship. In myth, they forged thunderbolts for Zeus himself. Strength, knowledge, and enormous stature all mirror the descriptions often associated with the Nephilim in ancient traditions. One of the most famous examples appears in the Odyssey through the giant Polyphemus. Odysseus encounters the giant living alone on a remote island, isolated from civilization and feared by everyone who crossed his path. That isolation feels strangely familiar. Throughout history, stories of giant beings repeatedly place them far from human society, hidden in mountains, forests, or forgotten lands. Genesis 6 describes giants who existed before the flood, while Numbers 13:33 confirms giant bloodlines appeared again afterward. Could the Cyclops be another surviving memory of those ancient beings? The deeper we look into these myths, the harder it becomes to dismiss them as coincidence. But before we go further, pay close attention to what comes next, because the deeper this investigation goes, the more the ancient world begins to connect in ways most people never notice. And by the end, you may never read Genesis the same way again. Different civilizations may have used different names, but the image remains almost unchanged. Enormous beings connected to a forgotten age that humanity was never supposed to remember. The next giant is not hidden in mythology or ancient folklore. His name appears directly in the Bible, Goliath. And unlike the creatures we explored before, Goliath is often viewed by some biblical interpreters as evidence that giant traditions continued after the flood narrative. 1 Samuel 17 describes him as a massive Philistine warrior whose height reached 6 cubits and a span. Clothed in bronze armor and carrying weapons too heavy for ordinary men, Goliath terrified the armies of Israel before the battle even began. His presence alone was enough to stop trained soldiers from advancing, but the most important detail is often overlooked. Goliath was not the only giant alive at that time. 2 Samuel 21 mentions other warriors of the same lineage, including Ishbi-Benob and another giant described as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. These were not isolated anomalies. The Bible presents them as part of a continuing race connected to the ancient giants of the past. That connection becomes even more unsettling when paired with Numbers 13:33. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. Scripture repeatedly points to the survival of these bloodlines after the flood. For a moment, the battlefield between David and Goliath becomes larger than a simple war between two nations. It becomes a confrontation between ordinary humanity and the lingering shadow of the ancient giants. But despite his terrifying presence, Goliath still falls, not through overwhelming force, but through precision, courage, and faith. The giant who seemed impossible to defeat collapsed before the eyes of an entire army. But even after his death, the mystery did not disappear, because the Bible continues mentioning giants long after Goliath was gone. Which means the story of the Nephilim may not have ended with him at all. The next giants emerge from the frozen world of Norse mythology. The Jotnar, the ancient ice giants said to exist before the rise of gods and men. Unlike ordinary mythical creatures, the Jotnar were described as primordial beings connected to the raw forces of the earth itself. They ruled the icy realm of Jotunheim, a land of endless mountains, glaciers, and eternal winter. In Norse legends, these giants were powerful enough to challenge the gods of Asgard. Yet they were not portrayed as mindless monsters alone. Many were feared for their ancient wisdom and knowledge of a forgotten age. That detail mirrors one of the most mysterious aspects of the Nephilim traditions. Beings of enormous power tied to an older world that existed before recorded civilization. At the center of this mythology stands Ymir, the primordial giant from whom the ancient world supposedly emerged. But one part of the story is especially disturbing. Norse mythology describes a catastrophic flood connected to Ymir, a flood so immense it consumed nearly everything in existence. Once again, the similarities to Genesis become difficult to dismiss. Genesis speaks of a world destroyed by water, yet traces of the giants continued afterward. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. Across completely different cultures, the same pattern appears again. Giant beings tied to a flood that reshaped the world. Could the Jotnar be another memory of the ancient giants remembered in Scripture? The deeper these myths are examined, the more they begin to sound less like fantasy and more like fragmented echoes of a forgotten past. A time when beings greater than ordinary men walked the earth before civilization rose from the ruins of catastrophe. The mystery grows even deeper when we turn to Hindu mythology and the terrifying beings known as the Asura. Ancient texts describe them as powerful entities locked in endless conflict with the Deva, battling for control over the cosmos itself. But what makes the Asura so unsettling is how closely their story mirrors the biblical account of the Nephilim. The Asura were not ordinary beings. They were described as mighty, ambitious, and deeply connected to divine origins, yet corrupted by rebellion and pride. That dual nature reflects the same pattern found in Genesis and the ancient books connected to the fallen angels. That connection grows even stronger when we examine the Book of Enoch. Enoch 7 describes how the giants consumed the resources of mankind until destruction spread across the earth. The same theme appears in Hindu tradition, where the Asura repeatedly bring chaos, conflict, and devastation wherever they rise to power. Different cultures, different names, yet the same ancient warning continues to appear. Even more striking is the scale of these battles. The Rig Veda describes wars between the Asura and Deva that shook heaven and earth itself. These accounts resemble the ancient conflicts described in apocryphal texts about the Watchers and the giants before the flood. Genesis 6 says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that." That single line continues to cast a shadow across every civilization we have explored, because whether they were called Nephilim, Asura, or something else entirely, the pattern never changes. Powerful beings tied to divine origins, rebellion, destruction, and a world forever altered by their existence. And with every culture we uncover, the possibility becomes harder to dismiss. Stories about giants may have continued in human memory far longer than many expect. The final giants bring us to the ancient legends of Ireland and the mysterious beings known as the Fomorians. According to Celtic mythology, they existed long before the rise of human kingdoms, emerging from a world tied to darkness, chaos, and the earliest age of the earth itself. The Fomorians were described as massive and terrifying beings connected to the sea and the unknown. Ancient Gaelic traditions referred to them as those who came from beneath the waters, creatures belonging to a time before civilization. That detail is striking, because Genesis also describes a world that existed before the flood reshaped human history forever. Like the Nephilim, the Fomorians were linked to destruction and conflict. Irish chronicles tell of devastating wars between these giants and the later peoples who settled the land. In the famous Battle of Mag Tuaid, the Fomorians were finally defeated and driven back into the darkness beyond the sea. Yet even after their defeat, the memory of the Fomorians never vanished. That pattern should sound familiar by now. Across culture after culture, giant beings rise, bring chaos, are cast down, yet continue surviving in stories passed from generation to generation. Genesis 6 declares, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that." The same shadow appears again and again, whether in Ireland, Greece, Scandinavia, India, or the wilderness of North America. 7 cultures, 7 traditions, 7 races of giants, and despite the distance between them, every path leads back to the same terrifying possibility. Humanity has been preserving the memory of the Nephilim for thousands of years without fully realizing it. After exploring 7 different traditions, one question becomes impossible to ignore. How could civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years preserve nearly identical stories about giant beings connected to a forgotten age? At this point, the pattern becomes far too consistent to ignore. The Book of Enoch, a text known in ancient Judaism and referenced in the New Testament, gives one of the most detailed descriptions of the Nephilim. It tells of the Watchers, 200 angels who descended upon Mount Hermon and took human wives. From that union came giant beings whose violence and corruption spread across the earth before the flood. Genesis 6 declares, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that." Those final words continue to raise unsettling questions. If the flood ended the age of the giants, why do giant bloodlines continue appearing throughout history? Enoch goes even further, describing the spirits of the giants remaining on the earth after their destruction. Some researchers believe this could explain why so many cultures describe giant entities connected to remote mountains, deep forests, caves, and isolated regions far from civilization. The similarities between these traditions are striking. Massive stature, superhuman strength, ancient knowledge, separation from ordinary humanity. From the Anakim and Rephaim of the Bible to the giants of Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the same image appears again and again. The mystery deepens with the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered near Qumran. Among the ancient texts were fragments of the Book of Giants, describing the Nephilim before the flood and their fear of coming judgment. Some passages suggest the giants searched desperately for ways to survive the catastrophe that was approaching. Could some of those stories have survived through human memory across thousands of years? Ancient traditions around the world speak of hidden races retreating into mountains, caves, or underground realms after global disasters. The Hopi tell stories of beings who survived ancient catastrophes beneath the earth. Tibetan legends describe Shambhala, a hidden kingdom tied to ancient wisdom and forgotten power. Piece by piece, the same possibility continues to emerge from every direction. What if the legends were never just myths? What if many ancient cultures preserved similar symbolic memories from humanity's distant past? Across every civilization we explored, the same shadow continues to appear. From the forests of North America to the frozen lands of Scandinavia, from the ancient kingdoms of Greece to the legends of India and Ireland, humanity has preserved stories of giant beings connected to a forgotten age. Different names, different cultures, yet the same pattern never disappears. Genesis 6 says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that." That single verse echoes through thousands of years of mythology, religion, and ancient tradition. The Nephilim may not be just a lost story buried in the Bible. Some believe they could represent a symbolic link connecting legends across the world: Bigfoot, trolls, cyclopes, Jotnar, Asura. Fomorians. Every culture seems to remember something powerful that existed before the modern world emerged. And the deeper these stories are examined, the harder it becomes to believe they were all invented by coincidence. Even the Bible continues referencing giant bloodlines after the flood. From the Anakim to Og of Bashan and Goliath himself, the memory of the giants never fully vanished. It survived in scripture, in oral traditions, and perhaps even in places history can no longer explain. And now the final question remains. Were these creatures only myths created to explain the unknown? Or are they fragments of a hidden history humanity has carried since the beginning of civilization? Somewhere between legend and memory, the mystery of the Nephilim still waits to be uncovered. So now the question is yours to answer. Which of these ancient beings do you believe is most connected to the Nephilim? Bigfoot, the trolls, the Cyclops, the Jotnar, the Asura, or the Fomorians? Leave your theory in the comments, and if you want to continue exploring the hidden mysteries buried inside ancient history and biblical texts, stay with us for the next investigation.